All right, welcome everyone. Welcome to the American Bird Conservancy Action Fund webinar, Advancing Historic Bird Conservation Measures in Congress. I'm your host, Annie Chester, Outreach Associate for the ABC Action Fund. Before we get started, I just want to make a few housekeeping notes. This webinar will be recorded. For instructions about captioning for today's event, please see the chat. We encourage you to ask questions to the speakers. You can do so using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screens. Each speaker has a few minutes at the end of their talk to answer those questions. We're excited to welcome in a great panel of speakers, so we're going to jump right into things. First, I want to introduce Senator Ben Cardin of Maryland. Elected to the Senate in 2006, Senator Cardin is a third-generation Marylander who has a long history of championing environmental legislation. As a sponsor of the bipartisan Migratory Birds of America's Conservation Act, Senator Cardin is working to authorize the Neotropical Migratory Bird Conservation Fund, the only federal grant program for migratory bird conservation. This bill would ensure that bird conservation enhancement projects are funded, helping numerous species, including the iconic Baltimore Oriole. Thank you for joining us today, Senator Cardin. I think he is dialing in here in a minute, so once he does, the floor will be his. I think we have just about one more minute till he calls in, so bear with us.
And Annie, while we wait, maybe you could introduce our second speaker who will be on video presentation today.
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll be also hearing from Rep. Pingree of Maine's 1st Congressional District. Rep. Pingree moved to Maine as a teenager and has been there ever since. She's passionate about Maine's diverse ecosystems and wildlife. Rep. Pingree was alarmed by the dramatic decline in bird populations in Maine and the rest of the country, which inspired her work in bird conservation. Rep. Pingree has taken action to protect birds specifically through her role as the chair of the House Interior Appropriations Subcommittee, ensuring that federal spending goes to migratory bird conservation, recovering Hawaiian birds threatened by mosquitoes, and reducing collisions at federal facilities. So you'll hear more about Rep. Pingree's work shortly.
Great, thanks. And my name is Steve Holmer. I'm Vice President of Policy, both for American Bird Conservancy and the American Bird Conservancy Action Fund. And one of our goals is to thank our champions who are advancing bird conservation and also building bipartisan support. And so we really appreciate everybody's participation today. We look forward to hearing from Senator Cardin. And you know, folks should be aware that we really have a historic opportunity this fall to pass major legislation to advance bird and wildlife conservation. And so we tremendously appreciate the leadership that we're seeing from Senator Cardin, Representative Chellie Pingree, and many others. And one of the things that we're going to be trying to do today is just highlight these champions and some of the various bills and policies that are currently in play. And maybe we could just move on to the next slide for a minute until Senator Cardin is able to join us. The legislation that has been introduced would tremendously improve our ability to fund migratory bird conservation. In addition to Senator Cardin, we also have Senator Rob Portman from Ohio, who has been the co-sponsor, and we very much appreciate the bipartisan support there. And in the House side, Representative Ron Kind and Representative Maria Salazar have introduced a companion bill, and we think that this provides an excellent opportunity to try to advance migratory bird conservation in this Congress. So we're encouraging our supporters to ask their representative and senators to co-sponsor these bills. And there are still a number of legislative vehicles in play this year that we think offer some type of a pathway forward. And particularly with Senator Portman and Representative Kind, planning to retire, this is an important year to try to see their efforts to the finish line. So we could just move on to the next slide and give a little bit more information about this bill and the bill numbers, S4187 and HR 9135. This program is really essential for funding migratory bird conservation. It increases the authorization. The proposed bill would increase the authorization up to 20 million and then ramping up to 25 million. And we think that this level of funding is needed just to deal with the reverse of birds. Several years ago, there was a paper that showed that there was a 3 billion bird loss over the last 50 years. And just yesterday, the new State of the Birds report was released. And it not only confirmed those findings, but found that in some ecosystems, those declines continue. In grasslands in particular, we're seeing staggering losses. And so it's critically important that we provide for birds on all sides of all aspects of their life cycle. And one of the other key parts of these bills is that they would change the match formula. And we think that that could greatly improve the access to the bill. And I believe we now have Senator Cardin on the line. It could be that he needs to be unmuted. There we go, call in user. Hi, can you hear Senator Cardin?
Hi, how are you? Sorry about the complications of getting onto the line, but it's good to be with you.
Thank you so much. We've just been offering a little introduction about the legislative effort for migratory birds. And I'll now just hand it over to you.
I've been listening to you. First of all, let me just thank your organization for what you do. It's so incredibly important. The status of birds in our community is really challenged today. The habitats are being destroyed. The number of birds that are not surviving are at a crisis level. And you're doing so much to protect the habitat and to protect these species. So I first want to thank you for all the work that you do and the people that are on this call. This is critically important for so many reasons, for agriculture, what birds do as far as controlling insects. It's important in regards to our economy with tourism. It's important in regards to our environmental and species diversity. All that is critically important. So I'm just proud to be your partner. So as you pointed out, I am the sponsor, along with Senator Rob Portman, a Republican and Democrat, of the Neotropical Migratory Bird Conservation Act. The Neotropical Migratory Bird Conservation Program has been very, very successful. It was established in 2000, and it's the federal investment into habitat protection, education, research, and monitoring. And this program works in many countries around the world. It's administered by U.S. Fish and Wildlife, but 75% of the funds are used outside of the United States for obvious reasons. The migratory birds do not know country boundaries, and we need to protect their habitat. So since 2002, $75 million in grants have been awarded to 628 projects in 36 countries. My legislation, along with Senator Portman, would reauthorize this program at a higher level, $20 million over 5 years, but just as importantly, reduce the match so that smaller organizations be able to participate in this program. We think this bill is critically important. We have strong support for it, and we need to get it to the finish line. If I might, I want to add one additional bill that I'm working with Senator Graham. Again, Senator Graham, a Republican from South Carolina, a Democrat and Republican, working on the Coastal Habitat Conservation Act. This bill deals with the habitat challenges that we're finding on our coastal communities. As we know, but as a result of climate change, the loss of wetlands, we have a tremendous challenge on protecting the habitat of our coastal bird community. There's a lot of reasons to be interested in both of these bills. In regards to neotropical migratory birds, as I pointed out, there are 380 species that are protected under this program. as the senator from Maryland, by far the most important one is the Baltimore Orioles. And of course, the Baltimore Orioles did better this year in the American League. We want to make sure the Baltimore Oriole itself does better. So I'm proud to work on these issues. I guess my message to you is simple. We need to develop a strategy to get these bills to the finish line, to make sure we have adequate federal funding in these programs, and to, I think, do a more effective job in raising the alarm as to the potential of losing some of these species through extinction, and certainly losing the volume necessary in order to control our environment with diversity of species, and also, of course, to enjoy the environment and our tourism and economic issues. We got to do a better job in getting that message out to the American people so that we can increase our support. I think we have plenty of support, don't get me wrong, as far as in the Congress itself, but we need to make this a priority, and I think working together we can develop a strategy that can make a difference. So I wanted to thank you for what you're doing. I want to thank you for convening this opportunity, and count me on your team. Anything I can do to help, I'll be there to help.
Great, thank you.
Thanks so much, Senator Cardin. I was wondering if you had a few minutes to answer a couple questions we got.
Sure, absolutely.
Awesome. So just to focus on the state level for a second, can you touch on why migratory birds are so important for Maryland?
Oh, absolutely. You know, Maryland's a coastal state. We are involved in migratory birds that are with us for part of the year. We won't have those birds in Maryland if the habitats where they go for the summer or the winter are not available. And if we don't have that diversity of species here, our insect population will be disrupted. It affects various species. Our top priority on the environment is Chesapeake Bay, and we need diversity of species in order to protect the Chesapeake Bay. So to a certain degree, the importance here goes to the bay, but it goes to the environment in Maryland. And I would tell you something else. We have a lot of bird watchers in our state. That's part of our economic structure in our state. Literally, jobs depend upon this. So it's very important as a Maryland senator to be concerned about migratory birds.
Yeah, absolutely. And you actually kind of are going right into the next question we had, which is how do other environmental issues you work on, like specifically cleaning up the Chesapeake Bay, help birds?
Well, first, let me say this has been an incredible Congress in dealing with our environment in the Chesapeake Bay. The bipartisan infrastructure package provided $238 million for the Chesapeake Bay, but the Inflation Reduction Act was an incredible, the largest contribution ever for climate change in the United States, and in fact in any country. But part of those funds that are in the Inflation Reduction Act deal with coastal resiliency. Well, guess what? Maryland has one of the largest coastlines in America. So it's going to help us deal with coastal resiliency, which is critically important for the quality of the Chesapeake Bay. So absolutely, we are going to be using every opportunity we can. We just announced the start of the Mid-Bay Environmental Restoration Project for the use of dredge material. We've completed Poplar Island. I invite you all to visit Poplar Island. It's a site where we've used dredge material to restore a once habitable island. Now the bird life on that island is absolutely amazing. We have so many people who are on pleasure boats just to go out and be able to see the incredible wildlife that has now been returned to that part of the Chesapeake Bay. So we're going to do, and we've been able to establish the beneficial use of dredge material in order to restore habitat that's important for bird life, for aquatic life. So absolutely, the Chesapeake Bay has been our priority. Been working on it now for several decades. We've made a lot of progress. We still have a lot more work to do.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I want to turn back real quick. I know we're almost out of time, but I want to ask one more question. Back to the Neotropical Migratory Bird Conservation Act. You mentioned that increasing funding is really important, but is there any other improvements that you've included in that bill that will help migratory bird and habitat conservation?
Yes. First of all, it's the predictable authorization for 5 years. But the other significant change is to reduce the match required from 3-to-1 to 2-to-1. And that is so important for smaller organizations, allow smaller organizations to be able to participate in these grants. As I pointed out, 75% of these grants are in other countries. So we are dealing with many cases, organizations that are really on the margin as an effort to restore habitat. You know, we have so many of the developing countries of the world that are really challenged economically to protect the habitat. And this bill will allow those organizations that are working in these countries to have the help of this grant program in order to carry out their work.
Well, thank you very much, for shedding some additional light on that. And Steve, do you have any last comments before we let the senator go?
Well, we encourage folks to ask for their support, and any final words from the senator.
Well, again, I thank you all. You all have been incredibly helpful. We have the support in Congress. We just got to make sure it's a priority and gets done. It doesn't get lost. And then during the appropriation process that we get the funds. So I think your advice to your membership is to please contact your local representative. We have bipartisan support in both the House and the Senate on these bills. So these are not partisan bills. I brought this up in the Environment and Public Works Committee, the Coastal Habitat Conservation Act. I believe we can get these bills to the finish line, but we need a push. So anything you can do to help elevate the interest in these bills and the appropriations will be extremely helpful. So thank you for your work, and we'll continue to strategize together. Stay well, everybody. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Senator Cardin.
Thank you. Have a good day, everybody.
You too. Yeah, so thanks again to Senator Cardin. We're really grateful, obviously, for his commitment to migratory bird conservation and more generally bird conservation. As he mentioned, these issues are incredibly important and have a lot of bipartisan support, so we're here to build on that. Next up, we are going to hear from Rep. Chellie Pingree, again from Maine's 1st Congressional District. And we're gonna kind of transition a second to a video because unfortunately Rep. Pingree couldn't be here with us live, but she sent a special message for us. And we encourage you to still ask questions throughout. Whenever you think of them, we are happy to answer them. And if we can't answer them, we will pass them on to the Congresswoman. So without further ado, Rep. Pingree.
Hi, I'm Congresswoman Chellie Pingree. Thank you for having me join you virtually today to highlight some important work my colleagues and I are doing in Congress to conserve birds and protect their habitats. I'm fortunate to live in and represent the most beautiful state in the country, Maine. From down east in Acadia to Katahdin and everywhere in between, the Pine Tree State has incredibly diverse ecosystems and wildlife. But our beautiful and valuable natural habitat is under massive threat due to development, chemical contamination, and air pollution. Climate change is causing shifts in plant and animal distributions, upending ecological communities, and changing forest dynamics. The result is a dramatic decline in bird populations throughout Maine and North America. In fact, North America has lost nearly 3 billion birds since 1970. This is a staggering loss because, as we know, birds play very important roles, such as being pollinators or controlling pests. In Congress, we're working to both fund conservation programs and to enact legislation that protects bird populations. Through my role as chair of the House Interior Appropriations Subcommittee, I push for federal funding that helps conserve our natural resources. I have long supported major funding increases to help reverse migratory bird declines. For fiscal year 2020, I helped secure $5 million for the Neotropical Migratory Bird Conservation Fund. To address the plastic pollution crisis, I co-sponsored the Break Free from Plastic Pollution Act, which would make manufacturers responsible for the plastic waste that they produce. This would ultimately reduce the amount of plastic that gets into our oceans and the toll it takes on birds and other species. I'm also a sponsor of the Migratory Bird Protection Act, which would permanently codify important and much-needed protections for millions of migratory birds. The staggering reality is that every year in the United States, 1 billion birds are killed due to collisions with glass, and more than 6 million birds die from communications towers. Because of this, my Interior Appropriations Bill for 2023 supports efforts by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to encourage communication tower owners to take simple actions like extinguishing non-flashing lights and using flashing LED lights. It also encourages the service's collaboration with other federal agencies to conserve migratory birds. This funding also includes millions of federal dollars for migratory bird management, wetland conservation, and Endangered Species Act recovery activities to protect wild birds and their habitats. I'm proud to work alongside the bird conservation champions in Congress that you'll hear from today. And I'm grateful we have the American Bird Conservancy Action Fund as partners as we work to protect our nation's wildlife and combat the climate crisis. Thank you again for having me.
All right, so that was again Rep. Chellie Pingree, and we thank Rep. Pingree for her work in advocating for bird conservation. Now I'm going to turn the floor over to Steve Holmer, who is the Vice President of Policy for both the American Bird Conservancy and the American Bird Conservancy Action Fund. I have the pleasure of working with Steve and learning from him. Steve has over 30 years of experience working to conserve endangered wildlife. So Steve, the floor is all yours.
Great, thank you very much. And again, our thanks to Senator Cardin and Congresswoman Pingree. And we're seeing tremendous leadership. And let's move on to the next slide just to frame up who we are a little bit. American Bird Conservancy Action Fund, was created with the goal of trying to increase our influence and ability to pass legislation, and publicly thanking our champions and building bipartisan support are really the key initial efforts that we're involved with. And of course, we're pleased to have Annie Chester as our outreach associate making all this happen. Next slide, please. So as we've heard, this bill is poised for action, and we're encouraging folks to contact their representatives. And if you go forward a couple of slides, it shows a map of where these projects are taking place. And I think this is, as Senator Cardin pointed out, 75% of the funds and the projects happen outside of the US, largely in Latin America and the Caribbean, where migratory birds spend a majority part of the year, and where there are, in many cases, severe conservation challenges. And so this is really a way to provide for birds year-round, and has really been a critically important program. Next slide, please. And so back to looking at the funding issue, the leaders of the House and Senate Interior Appropriations Subcommittee, Representative Pingree and Representative Joyce, Senators Merkley and Murkowski, have been terrific when it comes to supporting bird conservation programs. And over recent years, we have been seeing some increases to key programs like the Neotropical Migratory Bird Conservation Act and the Migratory Bird Joint Ventures, which is really critical for conservation delivery. And there were some modest increases last year, but I think it's important to know that our champions actually proposed more. And then unfortunately, in the final spending agreement, the total amount of money was reduced that was available, and so they were all scaled back a little bit. But I think that there's an indication that these programs may well see continued support and growth, which we really need to reverse bird declines. And we're also seeing some really good progress on some policy issues. We're starting to see some implementation of the Bird Safe Buildings Act, a bill that Representative Mike Quigley and Senator Cory Booker have introduced to make federal buildings bird safe by reducing window collisions and employing the available best practices that we have there. Next slide, please. And just to wrap up on the funding, the Congress has not come up with their final bill yet. That'll be negotiated after the election. So there still is time to contact your senators and reps in support of additional funding increases. And perhaps we could put our action alert link in the chat box because we have a way for folks to easily write those letters. And the next item on our agenda for this fall is Recovering America's Wildlife Act. This is a critically important bill that has already passed the House of Representatives. Senator Martin Heinrich and Roy Blunt are leading the Senate effort, and it's passed through committee and is now poised for a floor vote. And this is really a landmark bill in terms of the amount of new resources that it would provide for wildlife conservation. It provides a one-time down payment on Endangered Species Act recovery with $750 million. And we did a report back in 2016 about the ESA recovery of listed birds and found out that we have an astonishingly successful recovery rate when we focus on these issues. And so this funding, I hope, can help reverse some bird declines and bring back some species and recover these endangered populations. And then, of course, the big thing in this bill is the $1.3 billion to state wildlife and tribal wildlife agencies to implement their wildlife action plans. This will make a gigantic difference in terms of the ability to focus on species of concern and reverse bird declines. Next slide, please. So I just like to mention something coming up that's going to be a big issue for next year, which is the Farm Bill. The Farm Bill is actually one of the biggest sources of funding for wildlife and habitat conservation, particularly on private lands. We've added a new staff person, Steve Riley, who is currently developing a bird saver package that we hope to see incorporated into this bill. And just quickly mention, we have a terrific bird conservation champion in the chair of the Senate Agriculture Committee, Debbie Stabenow. Next slide, please. So just a quick, a little bit more about the Action Fund. We are working on developing resources to, help promote these critical issues. And we do work on a number of other issues and champions that we'll probably talk about in our next webinar. Our hope is to provide regular updates and opportunities to engage with our bird conservation champions. Next slide, please. And to that end, we have created a website and have a Facebook page, have been having regular blog updates to keep folks apprised of some of the recent developments. And we'll include these links in a follow-up along with the recording of the webinar. And we would encourage you to check out these resources and to share them with your networks. We feel like over time, it is critically important that we continue to build bipartisan support. And, quite honestly, there's a problem in Congress these days where the agenda is just packed and it can be challenging to get your issues addressed. And so part of this leadership challenge is to, encourage our champions to talk with their colleagues and do all the behind the scenes work that can actually get these bills across the finish line, as Senator Cardin pointed out. So we're really thrilled to have this terrific leadership, and we will continue to do everything that we can to keep you apprised of these opportunities. And we'd be happy to answer any questions at this point.
Thanks, Steve. Yeah, we had some good questions come in, so I will just pose them to you if you're good to go.
You bet.
So yeah, the first one was specifically about the Recovering America's Wildlife Act. And someone just asked, basically, what's happening in the Senate with Recovering America's Wildlife Act?
Well, right now it is, along with a lot of other issues, kind of the subject of a lot of behind the scenes wrangling. The bill has enough bipartisan support, we believe, to pass. And I guess there's still some questions on how the bill gets paid for that is getting worked out. But we think that this is really, in a terrific position to pass. And the way that we can, help on that is just to keep flooding our senators with letters of support. And it's been a remarkable coalition that has come together behind this legislation. Working with the states is fantastic. The Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies, National Wildlife Federation, and really a gigantic coalition of organizations have been backing this. It's taken a good long time to build this level of support, and so we're really hoping that we can get it done this year.
Yeah, thanks for that, Steve. The other question, someone also asked similarly, I believe when Senator Cardin was talking, basically like what is the timeline for voting on these various conservation bills? How long should people expect to be waiting?
Well, now is a great time to take action because we are sort of in a pause while with the election coming up. So Congress has gone home, and after the election, November 18th, they're going to be back. And at that point, there will be a furious legislative session. And so the more lawmakers have heard from their constituents about these priorities, the better chance that we'll see them. There's going to be a final spending agreement. There's going to be a national defense bill. We're hoping to see a number of other key provisions, Recovering America's Wildlife and some of the other wildlife bills all move forward. And so as soon as we have any news on that, we will certainly send out an update. And so if you're not on our network, please send us an email address and we will tap you in. So thanks so much for your engagement.
Yeah, so the next question we have goes back to Rep. Pingree's video, and basically how can people help support efforts specifically to boost funding efforts for bird conservation?
Sure. Well, we've been supporting a package of items to boost migratory bird conservation, and those are included in our action alert. This is going to be one of the big decisions that Congress will make is the final spending agreement. And all of our key programs have been proposed for significant increases by both the administration, the House, and the Senate. And so we're really hopeful that this is the big year to boost up some of these programs. The migratory bird joint ventures, for example, are not still fully established and need just a few more $1 million to kind of get to that full funding level, just a basic floor, just so that they can do the most basic implementation efforts. So from there, we hope to build and expand on the program further. Same with NNBCA. This is a program that has tremendous potential to grow. Every year it receives more grant proposals than it can fund. And so by increasing the authorization, increasing the appropriation, we can get a lot more done.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks for answering that, Steve. I think that is all for the questions right now. I don't know if you have any additional comments you want to add about things we didn't touch on already.
No, I appreciate you all joining us. And, again, please stay in touch, and we will do our best to alert you to bird conservation opportunities. This is really an unprecedented opportunity this fall. And we're really hopeful to see the NNBCA be reauthorized, Recovering America's Wildlife Act be passed, and see some significant funding increases for migratory birds. So thank you all for your time today. And if we can ever be of assistance, please let me know.
Yeah, couldn't have said it better myself. I just want to add, for folks who are interested, please check out the Action Fund website. It's a great way to show your support also for these various bills. We have some really easy thank you letters that you can send to your members of Congress to help encourage them to pass these legislative efforts. So definitely check that out. We also have a Facebook page and sign up for our email list. So I will give you all back the rest of your time, and you know how to connect with us.
Great. Thanks so much.